If you're trying to improve your NASCAR DFS process, or even if you're a new NASCAR DFS player and you're just trying to figure out the best way to make yourself money, the answer to any of your questions, it's going to be the Stokastic NASCAR Sims tool, the newest sport that we've added to our Sims packages here. And in this video, I'm going to show you how the Sims tools work and how you could use them to make some money playing NASCAR DFS in 2024 and going forward. And where this starts is with our contest generator. What the contest generator does is it's going to build a set of lineups that's going to match lineups that we're expecting the field to have. So that's in terms of ownership of particular drivers, how much salary people are leaving on the table. All of that is going to be built in the lineups that the contest generator makes. And there's different pool sizes that you could make in here. Now, there's a couple of different Sims packages. We have our base package that's going to allow you to build up to 500 lineups. And then we have our max package that allows you to build up to 10,000 lineups. Different packages, best for different people. If you're somebody who primarily plays single entry, maybe only play 1, 2, 3 lineup, stuff along those lines, then the 200 to 500 lineup pools, that's perfect, the base package. If you're somebody who's playing 150 lineups in the big milli maker type contest for the Daytona 500, then you want to be signing up for the max package and building out 10,000 lineups. And in general, what you want to do in the contest generator is you want to select the amount of lineups that most closely mirrors the field you're playing. And so if it's a big 150 max tournament, that's where you'd build 10,000 lineups. If you're in a single entry tournament that maybe only has 400 or 500 entries, then you'd select 500. For the purpose of this, I'm going to select 10,000. And also, you could change how the builds are going to be for these lineups based on the stakes you're playing at. So if you're playing in a higher stakes contest, you'd select the higher stakes setting. That's going to skew the ownership more towards what the ownership is going to look like in a high stakes field. And then inversely, the same deal. If you're playing in, say, like the quarter arcade, which is a 25-cent tournament, you select the low stakes there. Also of note that we have NASCAR in here for both DraftKings and FanDuel. So I'm going to select the marquee setting and now we'll generate the lineups. What the marquee setting is built for, that's your flagship contest. So stuff like if you see a milli maker, or if there's something like the $15 150 max is the biggest prize pool on DraftKings on a given week, this is what you want to select, the marquee. And that's what's going to cover the majority of the tournaments on DraftKings. But like I said, there's going to be the high stakes tournaments. Think like the $200 single entries, $100 single entries, things like that would skew more towards high stakes. And then things like your dollar single entries, your 25-cent contest, that's going to be something that skews a little bit more towards the low stakes. Now, after 45 seconds to a minute, the 10,000 lineups here are going to be built. Now, there's a couple of different things that you could be looking at on this screen. First, there's the pool exposure. That is the amount of drivers that are in each individual lineup. So for here, you see like Noah Gragson, for instance, 41.2% pool exposure. So that is going to be what it is that the contest generator is projecting for ownership. And this is our old classic ownership model where you could see what our classic ownership is projecting relative to our pool exposure that our contest generator is projecting for ownership. And this is the difference between the two of them. So if you ever think that a driver is going to be higher or lower owned than what our contest generator is projecting, what you could do here is you could change that. So let's see in here that Noah Gragson, who showed up in 41.2% of lineups, maybe you're looking at, you say, I think he's going to be lower owned than that. Then you could do a down arrow on him, up to 3 down arrows, and then you could regenerate the lineups, and that'll build you a new pool of lineups with a little bit less Noah Gragson in it. But if you just agree with all of the ownership projections that the pool exposure is spitting out, then you're all good to go from here, and you can start simulating out your lineups. Some other information you can get from this page is the lineups and ranker. So if you didn't want to simulate the lineups, just want to build them and you want to sort them and rank them, you can sort lineups based on metrics like ownership, projection, and then something else that's really useful for the contest generator is you can see how often lineups are duped, because when we simulate out the lineups here in a second, how profitable lineups are expected to be, it's going to be impacted by how often they're projected to be duped in large field tournaments. Because if something pays $1 million to first place, well, you'll win $1 million if you win solo, but your expected payout isn't as great if you're playing a lineup that's duped by a lot of the people in the field. So dupes, that's something that comes into play when we simulate out lineups, which we are going to do right here. So then when we get to the simulate lineups page, it's automatically going to bring all the lineups that we built from the contest generator. They're going to show up on the simulation page. Also here, you're going to see our projected ownership, our projected fantasy points, as well as the salaries for each individual driver. Now, if you want to, you could customize these projections. There's different ways you could do it. You could go right in here and just manually type in and change somebody's projection. So we've got Denny Hamlin in here for 24.87 fantasy points, but maybe you think that he should be projected for 23. You just type in 23, and there you go. It's going to change it. If you ever want to roll it back, you just click this arrow. It goes back to our initial projection. If you want to change it one fantasy point at a time, you could do an up plus there, or you could go to the minus. You could plus a minus, and that'll do one minus fantasy point for him. And then you could always rewind anything there. You could also sort the drivers by fantasy point projections to sort them by who's projected for the most or the least fantasy points. Same deal with the ownership column here, and you could change that manually as well. Although with that said, this is really more for aesthetic purposes. The actual ownership is driven by what the pool exposures are, not what the ownership is on this page. Other things you want to be looking at here. If you want to do your own custom projections where you upload a CSV, super easy to do. What you do is you just have a CSV that has 3 columns in it. You want to have one that says player name. That's where you're going to have the driver. A column that says projection on it. That's the projection. And then another column that says ownership. If you have that saved as a CSV, you upload that CSV, and that will automatically change and match all of the drivers to your projections that you might have individually. If you don't upload your own projections, which you certainly do not have to do, the base projections, the ones that are already loaded in here, these are the stochastic projections that we have up on the site. Other things that you want to take note of on the projections page is you want to make sure you have the right race selected. You want to make sure that you have the site selected that you're actually going to be playing on, and then the percentage to first payout. So depending how top heavy individual contests pay out, it is going to change in the simulations how individual lineups are expected to perform by ROI. So if we're going to be playing in a Millie Maker contest, that let's say there's a $3 million prize pool and $1 million to first, well, then you want to select 30% to first. If you're playing in a prize pool, let's say it's a $100,000 prize pool and it is $10,000 to first, that is 10%. So you'd select 10% to first. For this, I'm going to select 30% as a top heavy payout, where thinking about some of these flagship contests that do pay out very top heavy. After you have everything all ready to go in here, you've got your projections uploaded how you want, or if you just want the Stokastic Classic projections, after you have the right site selected, the right slate, and the correct percentage to first, then you're ready to run the contest simulation. And when you press this button, that's when it's going to start happening. We're going to be simulating the slate. Now, what this is doing here is it is simulating the race on a lap-by-lap basis. So each individual lap and anything that could happen in that lap, whether it's an accident, whether it's who's going to have the fastest lap, whether it's who's the leader of that lap, and then obviously how that impacts the rest of the race, that's all included in our simulations on a lap-by-lap basis. And then this is going to help us figure out which lineups and drivers are actually projected to be the most profitable on a slate. So what is happening here in a broader sense with that lap-by-lap simulation is we are simulating the race out 40,000 times. And then from those 40,000 race simulations, we've simulated the slate out 40,000 times. And all of the lineups that we built in the contest generator are playing against each other 40,000 times in a tournament setting with a 30% payout to first place. And this is going to help us sort the lineups that we built in the contest generator and let us know which individual lineups are going to be the most profitable. And then there's other metrics that we could look at on the page here in a second when this is finished, including things like how often is each individual lineup expected to win, how often are they going to finish in the top 10%, how often they're going to cash, and things along those lines are helpful information just to figure out what makes individual lineups most profitable. So we've got the simulation just about done here, seeing these lineups loading on the screen. And what you want to do from here is you could favorite the amount of lineups you're playing. So if you're playing 20 lineups, you'd enter 20. If you're entering 50, you enter 50, 100. You guys get the idea. And then you could also enter a custom amount. So maybe playing a very specific amount of lineups, like 27. When you go into favorite custom lineups, you type 27, done. And now you got your top 27 lineups selected. You could always unfavorite these. And if there's any lineup you don't like, you want to manually select one instead, you could just click one like this, and that'll favorite the lineups. For the purpose of this, I'm going to favorite 150. So we got a good sample size in here. And then whenever you want to export your lineups, you just click export. It's going to have a CSV file that you could upload directly to DraftKings or FanDuel to enter those lineups in. Now let's look at the different metrics that are on this page. Here's the lineups. right? So this is just all the drivers that we have in each individual lineups, and they're defaulted to be sorted by simulated ROI. And ROI is really the catch-all metric that you want to be using to figure out which lineups are the best, because while there's other stuff in here, like how many fantasy points each lineup is projected to score, what the ownership of those lineups are, how often it won, how often it finished in the top 10, how often it cashed, these are all helpful metrics, but it's all included in the simulated ROI. So this is how I like to sort my lineups and select the lineups I'm playing. It's by the ones that have the highest simulated ROI. You're also going to find on this page the salary amount in each lineup. And this is where NASCAR is so much different from other sports. Where something like basketball, you're very rarely leaving all that much salary on the table. But you'll see here for NASCAR, the lineup that I had in here that is the highest sim ROI actually did leave $700 in salary on the table. That's something a little bit unique to NASCAR that doesn't exist in the same way in other DFS sports. So let's go through the other tabs and look at what kind of information there is. First, there's the player ROI tab. And what this is going to tell us is each individual driver in our lineups, what was the overall average ROI of that driver in those lineups? So see here, for instance, every single lineup in total had Kyle Busch in it. On average, those had a 22.2% simulated ROI. So he was one of the better drivers in this simulation. Where you look at on the other side, somebody like Carson Hoscar, his lineups had a negative 62% simulated ROI. So he didn't simulate out all that well. Fun metrics to look at to get a little bit more context on those lineups. If you go to the favorites tab, this is just another way to look at all the lineups you had favored. And now your exposures. This is the exposures that we had to all of the drivers in our top 150 lineups. So you see here that Kyle Busch is in 90% of our top 150 lineups. Ryan Blaney is in 89.3%. And then here we've got the pool ownership. So this is what our projected ownership is in the contest generator. And then the leverage column, which is the difference between your exposure and the pool ownership. So it's letting you know who are you overweight to, who are you underweight to. So ultimately, who are you rooting for in the race, right? If you got Kyle Busch, 58% leverage to him, that's who you want to do well. You could sort this and look who you're underweight to. So underweight to Denny Hamlin. So with that in mind, you wouldn't want Denny Hamlin to do well if this was the set of lineups that you were entering. Now, how do you customize these lineups, right? You could always do stuff like entering your fantasy point projection that we did before, but there's more you could do as well. If you go into the ROI boost tab here, something you could do is, let's say you don't want as much Kyle Busch, right? We had 90% of Kyle Busch, and maybe you want to weed out some of those lineups. So you could go, say, like a negative 20% ROI boost to Kyle Busch. And what this is going to do is every single lineup that has Kyle Busch in it now is a negative 20% ROI boost. So now you could go into the favorites. You would unfavorite them, refavorite your top 150. And now if you go back to the exposures, we went from having 90+% of Kyle Busch down to 88%. So it looks like we would have to do more of an aggressive negative ROI boost because he projects so well for us to get less of him. So here's something else you could do. I'll clear the boosts here. That'll reset all of them. If you go to the lineups tab, you could do an exposure cap. So let's, and actually I'll go back. I will unfavorite and then top 150 lineups again, just so we get the ROI boost taken away. So now if we go into the exposure caps, Kyle Busch is in 90% of lineups. And maybe you have an idea in mind and you don't just want to do the ROI boost. And you could use the ROI boost to upgrade or downgrade any individual driver. Let's say you just decide, I only want 70% of Kyle Busch as the max. So if you go 70% of Kyle Busch and then go set exposures and adjust favorites, what's going to happen here is now we're going to have very close or maybe even exactly 70% of Kyle Busch after pressing this. So there we go. Favorited lineups to 70% of Kyle Busch. So yep, top 150 lineups now are 70% Kyle Busch. And what this is going to do is it's going to favorite all of your top lineups to Kyle Busch until we have 70% of him. And then it's going to give you all your best projected lineups that do not have Kyle Busch in them. And you could do that with as many individual drivers as you want with the exposure caps. Now, let's say there's a driver that isn't showing up in lineups that you want to get to, or maybe there's just somebody you want to get more exposure to. So let's go to David Raggins here, for instance, right? I'm going to go to David Raggins, and he is in 20% of lineups. Maybe here I'm going to say, I don't want 20% Raggins. I want more than that. You could go in the ROI boost. Let's just give him a 50% boost ROI here. And now I'm going to unfavorite top lineups, favorite the top 150 again. And then if we go back here, you'll see that Ragan went from being in 20% of lineups to 39.3. So that's another way you can manipulate some of your exposures to force in drivers that maybe you want a little bit more of exposure to that aren't popping up. And what's great about the Sims tool and the contest generator is it's going to automatically give you the lineups with Ragan that had the best projected simulated ROI. So it's a way that you could force the data to give you more of a driver, but it's still going to optimize those lineups to make sure it's giving you the best possible lineups that have David Ragan in them. So that's how you use the contest generator and the Sims tool. You don't even have to customize anything. If you wanted to, you could just play the lineups. It gives you as is, and good chances those are far superior lineups to the ones that you are currently already building. Also within here, we have the post-contest simulator. And what you could do within the post-contest simulators, you could look up previous slates after they happen, and you could look at some of the results. What are the drivers you got to? What was their actual ROI? What was the simulated ROI? What were the top lineups? It's a really good way to study your lineups and make sure you're doing everything that you possibly can to build the best lineups possible. So that's an overview of how to use the NASCAR Sims tool. If you have any questions at all, look below in the comment section and leave a question. I'll be circling back to answer those periodically. And also, if you haven't done it, you like this content, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's a link below to sign up for the NASCAR Sims tool. And it's something you really should check out, no matter what your experience level is as a NASCAR player. If you're a new player, this is going to be my first year playing NASCAR DFS, and I'm really excited about it using our Sims tool. There's been a number of different sports that I've been really successful at using the Sims tool, like MMA, MLB, and NBA. Really excited to test out the NASCAR tool as well this year. So thank you guys very much for watching. Stop guessing, start winning, and join Stokastic today.